Alright, you know me. Well, you know everyone who doesn't love a good bargain. This is the OnePlus 8 Pro from 2020. I picked one up on eBay, the cheapest one I could find actually, that still worked for £75. Every other one at that price was either completely obliterated or just didn't turn on. So I, in typical channel fashion, dailied this thing for 3-4 months at the end of last year. Guess that makes this, not only is this phone relevant and still worth buying in 2024, but also, did I get my money's worth? So, links, description, anything else relevant, pin, comment, you know the drill by now. Let's get straight into it. Okay, the 8 Pro is built really nicely. It's from the 2020 flagship Cool Kids Club, which means Gorilla Glass 5 front and back. Aluminium rails which barely fit the buttons around the sides but even out nicely on the top and the bottom. This design screams to me Galaxy S9 Plus because although I haven't reviewed the S9 here, it's pretty much a curvaceously mental version of that phone. Holding the 8 Pro is comfortable, the weight's spread well across the phone, it's got a nice density to it. This camera bump isn't gargantuan, but it's also big enough to be a ledge to hold the phone with. It also happens to be very sharp, there's no smoothing on this fine edge, but I don't mind it. This Onyx Black though is basically a mirror finish. I would have loved the ultramarine blue on this phone, but there's a super slight iridescence to this back, which I'm digging. I still keep this thing cased up because it's a fingerprint nightmare and it's managed to slip off every single surface I put it down on, so I'm not risking it. Few more things to note, the buttons are clicky, not pixel level clicky, but still they add to that flagship feel. And no, the alert slider hasn't yet become an integral part of my life, although maybe one day I'll get there. Doesn't detract from how clicky and tactile it feels though, so thumbs up either way. I've done my best to look past this patch of dead pixels and this invisible line of dead touch at the bottom of the screen because of it, which also fell on half my important app buttons. Yes, that did drive me insane, and I had to use the on-screen buttons because the swipe gestures didn't work, and this big old crack had me anxious cleaning the glass. The things I do for these faulty phones, man. Still, I've weighed up the screen as if it wasn't in this state, because your OnePlus 8 Pro won't be exactly like mine. These are just the reasons that, you know, mine was so damn cheap. Anyway, that aside, the screen itself is a huge 6.78 inch fluid AMOLED, maintains plenty of sharpness with 513 ppi, tops out at 1400 plus nits, which is by a solid margin not just the brightest screen I've used, but also enough for almost any sunny day I've maxed it out on, bar a couple. Nothing's really given me red flags in terms of the display quality on this phone, it's just a really well-rounded display. My first 120Hz in a phone, absolutely loving that. Color-wise, accuracy-wise, contrast-wise, and quite literally, rounded. I mean seriously, this has got to be one of the waterfalls to end all waterfalls. I love curved screens, and this one surprisingly hasn't caused almost any accidental touches either. On top of that, this hole punch is tiny, it's non-intrusive, I forgot about it after 10 minutes, which is literally exactly what you want. I tell you what I didn't want, mind you, low brightness display issues, like display issues. I found loads of people online complaining about the same problem, and it seems like a Samsung screen issue, but it's bad. It's really bad. There's a few variations of the issue, most of them are either green or red tints at around 30% brightness or lower. I was lucky enough to get both green and red tint on my 8 Pro, detect the sarcasm, and I've never seen any this bad. It's really noticeable around the hole punch. There's this bar of even dimmer pixels all the way across the top of the screen aligned with the cutout, but just in general OnePlus, yikes. And true, this doesn't affect all 8 Pros out there, but for the ones it does affect, it's infuriating because this screen is otherwise so damn good. Also, once you see it, you cannot unsee it, and as far as I've tried, there's no other way of reducing the tint with software or anything like that, because it is a hardware issue. Either way then, if you're unlucky enough to land an 8 Pro with any kind of tint, I feel for you, but if you're in a majority that don't, then the screen is still absolutely awesome. The OnePlus 8 Pro has the Snapdragon 865 with 8 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs on mine of UFS 3.0 in tow, for this here phone. And all in all, performance has been, for the most part through my usage, solidly snappy. It's definitely not a slow phone, and almost all the apps I use daily have been dealt with nicely. There are only a couple apps which are a real slowdown, one of which being the camera, which absolutely chugs, and I'll get to that later, but the majority of apps run fine. The 8 gigs of RAM here is again fine. The phone never felt like it struggled. That being said, the 865 is also 4 generations old now, which doesn't mean it can't keep up with normal usage, but in terms of headroom, I don't know how much more it's got in the tank. Also, thermally, it's got quite consistently warm, not uncomfortable warm, but still quite toasty with a bunch of apps open. My unit's also obviously got the dead zone down here, so it'd probably be a little more fluid to use if I could have had the gestures and not used the buttons. The high performance mode did improve the smoothness overall, but it also ramped up the heat even quicker than without it on, so I only really turned it on when the phone was cool. On the software front, you've got ColorOS 13.1. Weird way of spelling ColorOS, but hey. No, it's OxygenOS 13.1. It's been a really enjoyable skin to use. I found a lot to like about it, and I really do like it overall. For instance, the minimized notifications are great, and definitely something I wish stock Android did as well. The pop-up window view is super smooth, and again, a neat little feature. I love the customization options here, like fonts, icon shape, and sizing for the home screen and the app drawer. The always on displays too do have some dope looking presets. I also briefly used Android 12 before updating to 13, and I can safely say the uniformity of the skin definitely got a lot better after the update. There weren't any more randomly placed bits and bobs in the UI, half of them looking like stock Android, half of them looking like ColorOS. It was just a weird mix before, but they've evened it out, and I appreciate that uniformity. It's all following the ColorOS style now, and overall I do prefer that. Other little things too are nice. You can use a custom icon pack in the stock launcher. The system-wide animations are beautiful, very pretty but very snappy. And the notification panel is no fuss, easy to access, and looks fantastic in my humble opinion, but it's never perfect sailing. I've run into a good number of nitpicks and issues here that persisted for pretty much my whole run on the OnePlus. First off, the smallest ones, the UI scaling is kind of odd here. Apps like Spotify come out looking huge unless you have the UI on the smallest display size, or if like me you set it in developer options, which I did, but then the system font's tiny. Also OnePlus, these volume and battery pop-ups are giving me TouchWiz flashbacks. I know my battery's at 20% and I've literally always used my earbuds at high volume. Would you get the hint? A few other bits, the home launcher seems to freeze up, no joke, every single time I've unlocked the phone from off, and it only works when you turn the screen on first, then unlock, which is just odd. And then there's the blue light filter, which doesn't affect the lock screen at all. It only applies after unlocking. Again, weird. Maybe the fingerprint reader only works with white light. Who knows? Finally, the biggest complaint I've got about this software is actually not the way it handles touch refresh rate, but the touch sample rate. I've had countless times where the touch sample rate is stuck at 60 Hz and the animations are running or trying to run at 120, and the whole phone feels kind of stuttery and delayed when this happens. It's just so damn annoying. I found that sometimes checking the phone after it's been idle for a while can cause this, but also having tethering hardware acceleration on in developer options actually resolved this quite a bit. Still, it happened a heck of a lot in 3 months. There is a chance it's just caused by ghost touches down the bottom of my screen, and I wouldn't be surprised, but I've seen it happen randomly on its own accord enough times that I don't think that's the reason for it. On the refresh rate itself, some apps like YouTube and Snapchat just run really choppy and dip in and out of 120 Hz, so I found myself using a little app called SetEdit from the Play Store to basically force 120 Hz on permanently instead. These speakers here are really quite good. They get plenty loud, the bass is not bad, they do that sort of resonance chamber thing with the body of the phone. Standout on these has got to be the balance of the loudspeaker with the earpiece. It's more like a 40% up top and 60 at the bottom, which makes them feel roughly the same volume. The earpiece feels like it has its own full sound image and it's not just compensating for the high end, if that makes sense. At full volume though, the high end can get a bit jarring. Haptics on the 8 Pro are brilliant. Not the strongest I've used, but nonetheless, very crispy, very high-end, kind of metallic-y feeling, for lack of a better word. The UI also throws haptics in all over the place, but in a way that's tasteful and subtle and actually adds to the interactions without, overdoing them and butchering them. The under-display fingerprint reader at the bottom, it's so-so on reliability, not as consistent as a physical one. That said, it's still consistent enough. I got used to it fairly quickly, and it's pretty snappy at unlocking the phone. Battery life is meh, it's pushing 3.5, maybe 4 hours of screen on time if you're lucky, which is kind of my expected level at this point for older phones. I did have a few days with more than 4 hours screen on time, but it's still not worry-free battery life whatsoever. I still usually had a power bank with me. Saying that, it can be a one-day phone with light usage, and I mean very light usage if you're careful. I also forced 120Hz at all times was set at it, just to max out the smoothness, because why not? And the battery life didn't seem to get much worse than 3 hours, so if you carry a charger, I'd definitely recommend that. And alas, we arrive at the 4, or debatably 3 cameras on the back of the OnePlus 8 Pro. I've shot a good 1,000 photos and a good couple hundred videos on these, so let's get into them. The main and the ultra wide are the best sensors, no surprises. The lonely little telephoto is actually not 3x, it's 2.2x, 13 megapixels, but the output's cropped in to give you that 3x. Fun fact, you can only access the full size 13 in the close-up portrait mode setting, the more you know. And finally, we can't forget this absolute party trick 5 megapixel color filter cam, which ties off the main bump. It was also banned and it's now completely gone from OnePlus's stock camera app, so if you want to use it, you will have to get Gcam. I'll leave a link to the one I used somewhere in the description. Shooting wise, let's start with where I spent the most time, the main and the ultra wide. These 2 cameras are, on a good day, capable of really solid photos. And I mean that. It's obviously personal preference. The software processing here undeniably has a look to it. I'd say Samsung-ish fits the bill. But overall, it can pull out nice colours, albeit cranked to the absolute maximum on saturation. Dynamic range can be really good as long as the phone gets it right and brings up the shadows a little bit, but doesn't boost them all the way. Otherwise, it kicks out some mega bright photo that's just not even close to realistic. Noise is also a little strange. It's either fine and you don't notice it too much, or it's quite bad, although this is much more an issue for the ultra wide than the main. But yeah, daylight shots and good lighting are great on both main and wide. Dimly lit or early evening shots usually don't trigger the night mode, so they can suffer from noise a lot more. And details on the ultra wide can get very blotchy and very hazy in medium to low light. The weird ace up the 8 Pro sleeve though is actually their nightscape mode, which is literally the best part of the entire camera system. I shot a load of night cityscapes, so I left it in nightscape almost all the time, and the night shots are pretty consistently as well better than the daytime shots. I love the balance of these night shots. A lot of them had me impressed when I saw the results, they're sharp on both the main and the ultra wide, contrasty but still lifting the shadows enough, and noise is kept low. It just performs really well. I did a few longer exposure shots with the tripod mode, just propped it on a wall, where it captures for up to 30 seconds, and the results were a bit cleaner and a bit brighter, still impressive though. The macro mode from the ultra wide is also epic, gets very close to subjects, plenty of fine detail, seriously a top-notch macro mode here. And then the telephoto has the same sort of look as the 2 main cameras, but it's still only basically 8 megapixels and 3x, so anything past that's going to get a bit mushy and lack detail. For camera quality though, it looks fine. I can't really say anything majorly off about it, because the shots from it at 3x are just good, usable, nothing more to them. So while these cameras are at the best of times fantastic, I am still going to call this the king of inconsistency, and that's because getting those really nice, well-processed photos is just frustratingly hit or miss. A lot of the photos in trickier scenarios on this phone, or even just scenes that the phone can't understand properly, just turn out messy. The main offenders are white balance. This shot had nowhere near this level of cool tint, but the phone insisted on it 4 or 5 attempts later. Same with this nightscape. Weirdly, this one came out super blue on the ultra wide, but it looks like it's got a retro filter on top or something. And the 8 Pros also got subject tracking and autofocus issues in tricky lighting, and honestly at the best of times. And it usually ends up blowing the highlights out or just missing focus completely. Very niche also, but color reproduction on some browns and yellows, whether it was on bricks or skin tones, it didn't matter. The phone made them all into this sort of painty brown color, and you can tell where it's happened pretty clearly. Long story short, for photos, yes, I took well over 1,000, but in order to get those good 1,000, I also probably binned another 1,000 just in failed attempts on this phone. Oh yeah, and the selfie camera is the Sony IMX471, 16 megapixels, f2.45 aperture. It's shite. I'm sorry, I really dislike the selfies here. You can only get a usable result in bright light, otherwise it's just a mess. You can honestly choose between no HDR and the noise reduction works, or you can have HDR, which more often than not barely keeps the highlights anyway, and then throws on a load of noise. Easily the weakest here, the worst camera on the phone. Luckily again, Gcam works wonders. Video is up to 4K 60 HDR on the back, and the rear video in HDR looks great in bright daylight, struggles more a bit in lower light, and falls apart even quicker in darkness as you'd expect, so I prefer the standard non-HDR 4K 30 actually for those darker scenes. Autofocus here is again hit or miss. There are some weird artifacts when the HDR effect applies to the shot, and it can get grainy in the shadows compared to non-HDR footage. But all in all, video is well stabilized, has the same boosted colors as the photos, make of that what you will, is prone to stuttering occasionally, but overall does look good. And the nightscape video mode is only 1080p and has no stabilization, but the noise reduction is much better and it's brighter overall too, although it's still a bit soft. Finally, the selfie video is 1080p max and ironically looks quite a bit better than the photos. So overall, my OnePlus 8 Pro was worth it for 75 quid. I'd say this one was justified. I'm not saying if you buy one, you should spend that much. You should spend more than that, obviously, because you don't want one that's in a state like this. I just got incredibly lucky once again. I don't know how I keep doing it. If I did buy another one, I'd probably get the one with 12 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of storage, because it'll probably be a little bit more future-proofed if you do decide to keep it. Yeah, the 8 Pro's great looking, well built, premium, has a bit of performance left in the tank as well. The software and the camera quirks do make those its weakest areas, even if the camera can get very good results if you're patient with it. And the official software support for the 8 Pro and the 8 series in general is still up in the air at the time of this video. It's probably supported until spring of 2024, but that's not 100% confirmed. Then again, if you custom ROM it, probably solves both those issues pretty easily. Anyways, that's it. Thanks for watching. Catch you guys later.